We plan to post the recording of this call on FDA's YouTube in the coming days. First, during this call, we're going to hear from our commissioner, Dr. Rob Califf, and then from Dr. Peter Marks, the director of FDA Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research. Both of them will make opening remarks and share a few slides, and then we will open up the call to questions and answers from attendees. If you would like to ask a question, you can do so in two ways. You can either utilize the chat function at the bottom of your window and type your question in along with your name and organization that you represent, or you may utilize the raise hand function and I will call on you in order of hand raised. I'd like to ask stakeholders to limit their questions to one question and one follow-up, just so we have the ability to get through as many questions as possible. And I'd also like participants to make sure that they're on mute when they're not asking a question, and also turn your camera off when you are not speaking. And with that, I'm going to share my screen in case Dr. Califf wants to utilize the slides, and open up the floor to Dr. Califf.
All right, there we go. Thanks, Dale. And it's really great to see everybody. Peter, I feel incredibly underdressed. I usually wear a bow tie. Here you are, you look magnificent. I'm actually, Dale, already dressed for the golf course, which I hope to get out this afternoon, although the work keeps coming in. So I'm not sure I'm going to make it for a late afternoon round. But I do want to talk with you today, and I'm really excited about the chance to talk about something which I think might be the single most important thing for practitioners, for clinicians to do if they want to save a life and also save money in terms of helping our healthcare budget. But before I talk about the slides, and please leave them up, Dale, I'll say next slide when I get ready for it. I do have a little bit of scripted talking to do here to make sure the main points get across. You're well aware that I know that we're still having almost 400 deaths a day and over 5,000 new hospitalizations per day in the United States. And also that the current surge is waning overall, but it's predicted that it's likely that we'll have another surge as we spend more time indoors later this fall and winter. And I don't know about you, but I'm hoping to get out into events over the fall and winter as we head back to hopefully a more normal life. We also know that staying up to vaccines is the best way to protect an individual from the most devastating consequences of COVID-19. And the slides I show will be oriented to that in just a few minutes. As the virus has evolved, we know the original vaccine is not as protective against the currently circulating strains as it was against the original virus. So with that in mind, we've been planning for and gathering input on our approach to updated boosters since earlier this year. The FDA the team led by Dr. Marks has extensive experience evaluating strain changes with influenza vaccines, and we're confident in the data supporting these latest booster authorizations. Importantly, the approach we're taking with the updated COVID vaccines mirrors how we've historically addressed changes for the influenza vaccine. So earlier this week, the FDA authorized the updated boosters of both the Moderna and Pfizer BioNTech COVID-19 vaccines. And CDC also made their recommendation to enable the distribution and administration of these vaccines. The formulations of the vaccines are authorized for use as a single booster dose at least 2 months following the primary or booster vaccination. The updated boosters are known as bivalent vaccines because they contain 2 messenger RNA components of the SARS-CoV-2 virus, one from the original strain of the virus and the other having one in common with the BA4, BA5 Omicron variant lineages of the virus. The authorization for the updated Moderna COVID-19 vaccine booster applies to individuals 18 years of age or older, and the authorization for the updated Pfizer BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine booster applies to individuals 12 years of age and older. Individuals in these age groups are eligible for the respective boosters if it's been given at least 2 months since they've completed the primary vaccination or have received the most recent booster dose with any authorized or approved monovalent COVID-19 vaccine. The updated boosters contain the same basic ingredients as the original vaccines, but are modified to target the circulating Omicron variant BA.4 and BA.5, as well as the strain that was included in the original vaccines. These updated boosters meet the FDA's rigorous standards and are expected to help restore immune protection against COVID-19. Our experienced staff evaluated and ultimately based on this decision on the totality of available evidence. This included extensive safety and effectiveness data for each of the monovalent messenger RNA COVID-19 vaccines, which have now been used by billions of people worldwide. Additionally, the agency evaluated safety and immunogenicity data obtained from a clinical study of a bivalent COVID-19 vaccine that contained messenger RNA from Omicron variant BA.1 lineage that's similar to each of the vaccines being authorized. Non-clinical data obtained using a bivalent COVID-19 vaccine that contained messenger RNA from Omicron variants BA.4 and BA.5 lineages were also evaluated. Dr. Marks will give you a lot more detail on the considerations of the data for these authorizations. Before I turn it over to him, though, I want to make clear that these updated boosters present us with an opportunity to get ahead of the next predicted wave of COVID-19. They're critical in helping protect teens and adults from the most serious outcomes of COVID-19 caused by the currently circulating variant. It's a really interesting part of both the biology and the amazing changes in biotechnology that essentially in the course of 2 months, the industry was able to get the orders for a new vaccine and change the components and get the vaccine out literally in about 2 months. But regrettably, only about half of eligible Americans have received their first booster dose. So as a clinician who spent most of my career caring for heart attack patients, I urge everyone to consider receiving a booster and encourage other practitioners to speak to their patients about the importance of these boosters. And for those who may be wondering, the CDC says you may get a COVID-19 booster at the same time as the annual flu shot. So before I turn it over to Dr. Marks, Dale, if you could go to the second slide in the deck. Whoop, there we are. And I think you're all familiar with looking at this tale of the waves of variants as they swept through our society. And you can see at the far right-hand part of this figure that indeed, as we're nearing the end of August, you see there is some decline, but it's still there. And I think Peter will show you some more data about this. Next slide. This to me is really one of the most important slides that I think because there's so much discussion and debate about nuances of all this, I think the main message may have gotten lost with most people. And the main message here, if you look at that top line, that's the incidence per 100,000 population of death in people over age 50 for people who have not been vaccinated at all. The second two lines, the dotted and the dark blue lines, are people that got the primary vaccination or people that got the primary and the first booster. And then the purple line, you'll notice the very lowest risk of death is in people that got the second booster. So the main point here, and you'll notice the time frame goes back to about April 2022. So just to quickly go through how I interpret this slide, for those people who say, I'm not worried, I'm not getting vaccinated at all, they have a 14 times higher risk of dying in the last 3 months from COVID than people that got their second booster. And for those who got only the primary series, they have a 3 times higher risk of dying than people who got the second booster. Now, the first booster data could be a little confusing, but if you think about this, knowing that the effect of the boosters wanes, those who got the first booster, by the time we got to about April of 2022, the benefit was wearing off. And so that second booster, even on top of the first booster, reduced the risk of dying by about threefold. I hope that's clear. And Peter, if you have other interpretations, let us know when we get to you. Let's go to the next slide. Now, as a clinician, we are very focused on the risk and benefit to the individual. But for the major diseases, we also talk a lot about the overall effect. For example, in my specialty of cardiology, we give statins, which reduce the risk of death and by a modest amount in each person. But for a disease that affects so many people, the overall effect is enormous. And this is the same for this booster that we're now recommending. Now, the one assumption here is that the new booster will do as well as the previous boosters have done. But as I've shown you, we now have experience with the primary series, the first booster and the second booster. And so there's no reason to believe that we won't achieve the same benefit with this next booster. And according to CDC modeling, if we only do as well as the annual flu vaccine, you'll see in the left-hand column, we would prevent 100,000 deaths. We would prevent 1 million hospitalizations. And for those of you who either manage or deal with people working in hospitals, you know the amount of stress that currently exists in the clinician community. If we could avert that with a simple vaccine, what a benefit that would be. And there's been a lot of discussion, well, the vaccines don't work to prevent infection. That's not true. The effect is modest. It's not an enormous effect on preventing infection, but in the whole population, you can see a lot of infections prevented. And the net effect of this would be saving $62 billion for the healthcare system. And if you look at the right-hand column, if we had a wildly successful campaign and 80% of those who were eligible got their new boost, you can see the numbers are even larger. Let's go to the next slide, which is the last one. And this just shows where the costs come from. And it shows, on the other hand, the cost of actually administering the vaccine, which is basically almost invisible when you compare it to the costs that would be saved. Having spent a lot of my career doing technology assessment of cost-benefit analysis, this is what you call a dominant intervention. It not only improves health status, it also reduces costs by a significant amount. And that's the kind of intervention that we're looking for. So I hope this, and we will make these slides available there from public sources, but I hope this is highly motivational, that giving a simple shot right now over the next few months would make an enormous difference in saving lives, but also reducing stress on the healthcare system. So with that, I'll turn it over to Peter.
Thanks very much, Dr. Califf. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to go through my slides first, and then I'll double back to some remarks, because I think it picks up from Dr. Califf's slides. This is just a blown up version of the tail of what Dr. Califf showed. And I just want to point out that, because I saw a question come up in the chat, why should I get, COVID-19 is going away. Why should I bother getting vaccinated? And I would say to you, no, it's not really going away real fast. And in fact, if one looks at very closely at the trends here, even though the number of cases being reported is trending downward modestly, over the past couple of weeks, it's trended down by about anywhere between 5 and 10% per week. The number of deaths actually is still increasing. Now, we expect that sometimes after we've had a big wave, but we're still having between 400 and 500 deaths a day. And the trend actually over the past week has been upward. So we're still not out of the woods from this latest wave. If I have the next slide. What we also know, though, is that the pick of a BA.4/5 booster back at the end of June was probably not a bad pick, because right now 88%, 89% of what is circulating in the United States is BA.5. The other blue that you see growing there is BA4.6. And so BA4, BA5 variants are really the dominant variants by far here in the United States right now. And that's what this vaccine has been developed to help cover with the BA4-5 component. Have the next slide. This is just picking up on some of what Dr. Califf noted, just to show you that you can see, yes, things are falling, and that these are actual numbers to the left side of this graph. And then as you move over towards the right side, you'll see the predictions, and you can see that increasing numbers of cases through October, and then a peak that, if I could show it to you, would be kind of closest to where we are or where we were in July, or even higher, depending on what modeling you use. So the idea here of giving the booster vaccination now is both to blunt the current wave that we're having, but also to help prepare us and prevent us from having the kind of wave that could disrupt our Thanksgivings and Christmas plans this coming year. The next slide. And ultimately, we're dealing with trying to address this graphic, which is, it looks complicated, but it's actually pretty simple. We know that immunity wanes over time. It wanes to the greatest extent in older individuals. That's the purple line going down. We know that that the more time goes by, the higher potential we have for some new variant that may not be as well covered by our vaccines. That's the red line going up. And then the blue rectangle in the middle is the fact that in the Northern Hemisphere between November and March, we tend to go inside a whole lot more. And that's a fertile spreading ground for COVID-19. So that means the risk of a major COVID-19 outbreaks increases during that period from November to April. So I think that what I would say is that we took the totality of data that we had together to authorize these boosters. And I just skip ahead to just give you the major pieces of evidence and then explain to you a little bit about why we took the various pieces of the action the way we did. So just for those who might be concerned that these vaccines were not, we don't have clinical data specifically with this exact vaccine, I think there's a lot of reasons why we're very comfortable with this. First and foremost, this is something we do all the time with influenza vaccine. And so we are used to making strain changes without having clinical data when we have a lot of experience with the platform. And for that matter, we have a lot of clinical experience with the mRNA vaccine technology now. After all, 1 billion doses have been given globally of the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines. That's to more than 500 million individuals. So that's a lot of experience. More than 200 million people here in the United States have received these vaccines. The second thing is that their clinical trials have been conducted with vaccines that are quite similar to the vaccines that are being deployed. In fact, on 3 separate occasions, Pfizer and Moderna each made booster vaccines that they tested in clinical studies in the cases of the Beta, Delta, and Omicron BA1 variant. Now, the Omicron BA1 variant is quite similar to the Omicron BA4-5 variant when you think about it. It is true that there are in the spike protein about a total of about 20 amino acids. Those are those subunits that are different. But that's not an incredible amount of difference. And in fact, in the most critical region, the receptor binding domain, there are only 10 amino acid differences. So we're pretty sure that what we're going to see are similarly efficacious or similar effect in generating an immune response. And we're also pretty comfortable that the safety profile will be very similar. And then obviously we've also looked at the non-clinical studies that were done. Those are studies done in mice, which indicated that these boosters would generate a good response against the BA.4/5 variants. So that totality of evidence makes us quite comfortable here. Now, there are some things that people are wondering about, perhaps. For instance, why did we come up with this 2 months since last vaccine? Some people misinterpreted this as, well, we're going to get boosters every 2 months. That's not the case. It's 2 months since the last vaccine for this one-time booster. And we're not sure, it's possible that in the future, months and months from now, we might recommend another dose of this booster. It's hoped that we won't have to do this again until next year. But the idea here was that 2 months was just to make sure that anyone who might have been more recently boosted over this past summer, those would mostly be people over 50 years of age, did not get 2 doses right on top of each other, because that would not be likely to have effect. That was the reason for that. Most people, in fact, the very large majority of people, have been boosted many months ago last. And so it's really not all that relevant. The other issue that's come up is, why did we take away the authorization for the prototype boosters? And the reason for that is that it actually is very confusing to have 2 booster vaccines. And as we transition into having essentially a yearly vaccine, because that's what this looks like we're probably going to end up having to do, we wanted to make things simpler. That's something we heard loud and clear. Anyone who listened to the ACIP meeting yesterday would have heard that message multiple times: simplify, 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 fewer formulations, fewer choices, better. And so because the BA.4/5 and original bivalent, the 2-component booster, is expected to give us good immunity across a variety of different potential COVID-19 variants that might come in the future, it seemed wise to basically stop use of the original booster in those populations for whom the new one was authorized. The data that I haven't shown you, but it's published, that comes out of South Africa, indicates that one of the interesting things about the BA.4/5 variant is that it elicits a very good immune response that's actually very similar to the Beta variant, in that when you make an immune response to BA.4 or 5, it tends to protect against a wide variety of different COVID-19 variants at a relatively high level. So we felt that the combination of the original vaccine plus that BA.4/5 component would be actually as good or better, and has a very high chance of being as good or better than what we had out there in terms of the original vaccine. And having 2 out there would have been confusing. So that was the rationale there. And with that, I will just say that I think, obviously the time will tell, but I think this will go down as a place where we at FDA leaned in very heavily, leveraging all our scientific knowledge and our knowledge of how to do things safely to come up with something that potentially may save a lot of lives. And we're very much hoping that people will consider going out and getting boosted with this new bivalent vaccine. So I look forward to questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Marks and Dr. Califf, for your remarks. We're going to move into the question and answer section. I see we already have a number of questions in the chat. And I'll just remind you, if you want to raise your hand and ask your question live, that is welcome as well. I'm going to start out at the top of the chat for with a question from Aya. I'm not going to even pronounce her last name because I know I won't do a good job of it. Who asked, I heard earlier that COVID might become like the flu and that it will always be here. Do we have more clear evidence of this now?
I'm happy to take that one. I think there's a lot of concern that we are in it for the long haul, at least for the next few years with COVID. I don't think we have vaccines that are going to be able to wipe this out yet. And so I suspect that over the course of the next couple of years, we're going to have to be vaccinating with boosters, probably around the same time, hopefully, that we vaccinate against influenza. So it's possible that next year, can't say for sure, but it's possible that for next year, people will be able to go at the same time they get their flu vaccine and get their COVID-19 vaccine, which, by the way, you can actually do this year if you'd like to. There's no reason why you can't get the flu vaccine and the COVID-19 vaccine at the same time. And our hope is that we're very aware that multiple academic laboratories and companies are working on the next generation of COVID-19 vaccines, ones that can give us a much more potent immunity and that can be deployed easily so that we can try to go around the globe, much the same way as has been done with smallpox and we've tried to do with polio, and try to eliminate or eradicate this virus. But I think that's probably at least years off. So we're probably going to have to get used to COVID-19 and dealing with vaccination for it for at least for the foreseeable future. And by the way, I would really like to be wrong about that. I'd love it if this thing just like disappeared, but that just doesn't seem likely at this point.
I'll just add, I was just on a call with Ashish Jha and Tony Fauci and others, and there was agreement. I mean, what Peter said, it just, I think all the people that have been studying this feel like it's going to be here. Maybe we'll get lucky though, but I think we have to plan on this being around for quite a number of years.
Great. All right. Our next question is from Judy Korn from the American Thoracic Society. Judy asks in the chat, what is the recommendation for adults with chronic conditions or over 50 immunocompromised who have already had 2 boosters?
The recommendation, I think, is clear. If you're more than 2 months since your last booster, get this updated booster. And, a lot of people have been infected in the last few months too. So the recommendation is to wait 3 months after your infection.
Great. And there's another chat question from Sebel who asks, how will this change the definition of up to date with your COVID vaccine?
I think, Peter, I'll be interested in your view on this, but I think that's a CDC issue, the terminology that we don't control. I did want to add, I'm turning 71 this month, so I'm one of those elderly people that was referred to in the last question, and I will be getting my. I've had 4 shots, the primary series and 2 boosters. I'm getting my updated booster this week as soon as it's available in the local pharmacy. Peter, any comments on up to date?
Yeah, I will be hearing from CDC on that. I think it's important to understand that there will probably, my guess again, I don't want to take words out of their mouth, but they probably will make a definition that will include being boosted in the not too distant past. And in other words, either having had the primary series in the not too distant past, if for those 20% of Americans who haven't been vaccinated, who I wish would go out and get vaccinated, because it is, as Dr. Kayla said, a very inexpensive way of preventing a lot of problems. But aside from those, the rest probably will be that we've been boosted within the past several months. But I suspect that we'll hear from them in the next couple of weeks on that.
Great. I also have a question in the chat from Stephanie Kaplan from the American Association of Hematology. And she asks, are you able to discuss how you are planning to roll this out or message it to communities with impaired immune systems? Or have you discussed how CDC could most effectively communicate this information to this community and the healthcare providers who care for this vulnerable patient population?
I am going to admit weakness here, in my view. We've had a lot of discussions about how to message it. What we've just given you is the primary message, including beginning to really think about this as a routine part of healthcare that may have something like an annual update. But we have to look at our previous booster success and say it's been a great medical and scientific success. Look at the reduction in mortality, but we haven't gotten the majority of the message across to the majority of people. And I'm also very aware that a number of individuals with immune deficiencies have not gotten the right treatment. And so we are going to have to double down on our message because that is a vulnerable population. Peter, you've dealt with the clinical aspects of this quite a bit in your career. What would you say?
My understanding is that there will be, the administration is going to be trying to target both immunocompromised and underserved individuals in a booster campaign this fall. So stay tuned for that. That will come from parts other than FDA, but will come out of HHS and the White House.
I do think the most powerful message would come from individual clinicians seeing individual people in various kinds of clinics. And I think we've got to get the message across, which is one reason I'm glad we're having calls like this.
Great. We have a participant with her hand raised, Alice Stanford. Do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Thank you so much. Dr. Stanford, the Regional Director of Region 3 of HHS and a pediatric surgeon. I heard you mention that removing the authorization from the original vaccine. So does that mean if a person has never had a vaccine that they don't require the original to be primed before they would subsequently be eligible for the new bivalent booster to have maximal protection against our current strain?
I'm really glad you asked that question. Peter is all primed to answer it. So it's a very important.
You, Dr. Stanford, thank you. I actually probably should have done a better job explaining this up front. So thank you for asking it. We have deliberately left the original vaccines there for the first series, the primary series. So the first and second doses of the mRNA vaccine should still be of the original vaccine. The reason for that is we want to give everyone the broad-based immunity that we know comes from those two doses. We may decide later on, several months from now, to update everyone to the newer boosters. But for right now, we know how well that seems to protect against both hospitalization and death. And because we have the data on those for hundreds of millions of people, we feel most comfortable making sure that everyone gets that level of protection. The good news is, if you're getting, for instance, the Pfizer vaccine, you get it day 1, day 21, and then 2 months after your day 21 vaccine, you can then get up to date by getting the BA.4/5 booster. And that's what I would, if somebody came to me today, and actually, believe it or not, someone actually decided, I don't know what it was about boosters, they decided that they've never been vaccinated before, and they decided they now want to get vaccinated, and they want to know how to catch up. That's the way to catch up, is go out and get your first dose today of the original vaccine. Get your second one either 3 or 4 weeks from now, and then 2 months after that, get your booster, and you'll be caught up. And I'm actually was very glad to hear that somehow I think people with this campaign realize that these things are here to stay, and hopefully some of the data like that, the data that Dr. Califf showed, is making a difference, at least to some people who haven't previously been vaccinated.
Since you're a pediatric surgeon, let me take advantage of that to also, Dr. Marks talks elegantly about this. We've not done well with vaccination of children. People that were really committed to vaccination of children from COVID rushed right out and got their children vaccinated, but the percentages vaccinated are very low. And I want to call attention to the emerging data that vaccination protects against long COVID. In addition to the death and hospitalization data we showed you are impeccable, like the highest level of evidence I've ever seen in my career. We got randomized trials and multiple real world evidence studies from multiple countries. The long COVID data is just beginning to come out, so we don't have the same level of certainty, but there are recent papers showing the exact sort of relationship I showed for death in that slide, that the more up to date you are in your vaccination with the boosters, if you do get infected, the lower the risk that you'll develop long COVID. Now, we'll have to wait for definitive data, but it's enough for me to definitely get my grandkids vaccinated.
And I would just add that I think, I've been kind of following long COVID pretty closely. And pediatric long COVID it's very challenging because it's hard in a 7 or 8 year old to get a hold to try to assess brain fog quite the same way as we do in adults. But there is, at least among pediatricians, this impression that there are, at least in some kids, signs of long COVID. And again, for something that's reasonably easily preventable, I think it's just such a good idea. And frankly, I would argue that the time to get your kids vaccinated is the younger the better, right? Just get them vaccinated to avoid this.
So along the same lines, there's been a lot of discussion about this is a bivalent vaccine or vaccines. What would you say to those who are hesitant about giving a vaccine that is bivalent? When they ask the question of, is there a preservative in this? Is it safe for younger kids to get a bivalent vaccine?
So I'm happy to start. But first of all, these vaccines, the mRNA vaccines, don't have preservative in them. They don't have heavy metals in them. They are essentially. They also don't have other things that people have accused us of putting in vaccines. No, all kidding aside, they don't have preservatives, which is what people worry about. They don't have aluminum, mercury, etc. Bivalent vaccines, many vaccines are the equivalent of multivalent vaccines, and in fact, we routinely give children vaccines that have 13. And now 20, will be 20 soon, different antigens to try to elicit immune responses against various types of bacterial antigens. Or, for instance, we do it every year for influenza to adults because most influenza vaccines have either 4 or 3 components in them. They are multivalent. So this concept of multivalent vaccines is nothing new, and it's something that I think we're very, very comfortable with.
Great. There's one more question in the chat that I think we haven't addressed yet, and I'm sorry I don't see the first name, but I'll ask it on your behalf. What would be the time frame of being vaccinated after recovering from the COVID virus with the booster?
We're saying 3 months. The reason is that it does look like, being infected does offer immune protection for a period of time, and it wanes just like the vaccination. And the best protection is the combination. So, this is an area, it's sort of mushy science in a way, although the general concept, I think, is very well borne out that waiting a while is important. Exactly how many days, that it's the best estimate that people can make. But If you've just been infected and you get boosted, is less likely that you'll get the immune response that would be helpful.
And then I have one last question, came into the chat with me. Is there any understanding of which booster to make recommendations for patients in immunocompromised situations? So is there one that is better for a different age population or a different demographic that you have information on?
Yeah. So I would say that the best booster is the one that you can get into the arm. Either of these mRNA vaccines, although there's slightly different dosages, as you'll see in terms of the micrograms of RNA, they're different. They have a different potency. So I think we believe they work approximately equivalently. There is a fair amount of data to suggest that. I know that there was some small amount of data that came out that mixing and matching the two different mRNA vaccines could be potentially beneficial, but there's not a lot to support that. I would say that for an immunocompromised patient, I would just get that. I think the more important thing is that they get the booster sooner rather than later, because we do have continued circulation of COVID-19. I think we do also very well know that people previously infected with BA1 certainly get BA4-5. Those are some of the data out of Penny Moore from South Africa. We know that because South Africa, where only about 15% of the population is vaccinated, has been a place where we have witnessed some very good epidemiologic studies. And so if I had, I'm a hematologist oncologist by training, treated leukemia patients for many years, I would want them to be as up to date. And now that this booster is available, I would be looking to make sure that next week or this weekend they had an appointment to get up to date against this BA4, BA5. I'd have them consider that as something good to do.
Great. Well, with that, we are 1 minute to the end of our time today, and I want to give a few minutes or 1 minute to each of you to make closing remarks. So I'll start with you, Dr. Califf.
Yes, I'd make 2 points. The one I made at the beginning, this is a simple, very inexpensive, free to the patient maneuver that a clinician can make that will save, estimated 100 to 150,000 lives over the course of the next few months in the United States, and also relieve the pressure on the healthcare system that would come from all the hospitalizations. It is based on the presumption that this booster will work like the previous 4 shots have worked, but I think we have good reason to believe that it will. And then also just want to respond. I can't resist, Dale. I see the question in the chat box about masking. I think this is a struggle for many of us about when to wear a mask and when not to wear a mask. It's not the FDA's job to set down the rules for this. But, I'll just say that for me at age 71, despite being maximally boosted, I still, when I'm in closed quarters with large groups of people I don't know in an area that has a reasonably high infection rate, I still mask up. And, for the last decade before coming back to FDA, I did a lot of Asian travel. And I always thought the people in Asia that wore masks in airports I didn't know what was wrong with them. And now I understand. They had been through the previous SARS episodes. And I think it's very reasonable that we do mask up. And I think the key societally is that we're tolerant of people with different levels of risk tolerance. And I'll just make one recommendation. Professor Wachter, W-A-C-H-T-E-R at UCSF, has a great set of tweetorials on this topic, a way for you to think about your own personal risk and your own personal behavior. So with that, Peter, I'll turn it over to you.
No, thanks very much. I just want to thank everyone for joining and thank everyone for their efforts. I think this is a time when I hope people will consider going out and getting these boosters. I think this is an important time when we can hopefully do something that will make a real difference here in terms of trying to save some additional lives in the near future and over the course of the next months. I think hopefully by having people's questions answered, they'll be able to make decisions about what to do about this, and really appreciate all of your help answering those questions as well for people. So thank you very much.
Thank you. That concludes today's conversation. Thank you so much for joining us on a holiday weekend Friday, and we look forward to engaging with you in the future.